Good evening and welcome to the April CrimeCraft meeting for Mystery Writers of America, New York. My name is Gary Earl Ross. I'll be your host this evening. This evening's topic is a touch bizarre. Now, Nev is here. Nev, did you have anything you'd like to say first from the president's perch? If I can.
Hello. Hello and welcome. My camera has been doing a little funny thing, so I'm trying to adjust it as we speak. No worries. Glad everyone's here. Very topical conversation today. So Gary, kudos, and I'm expecting this to be a lot of fun. Take nothing seriously. We are not a political organization. No. This is intended to be conversation between friends. And, we're not going to get offended or offend anyone. So with those caveats, I will tell you, we just sent out a newsletter. There's lots of goodies in there, lots of good stuff. And well done, Doug.
Yes, yes. I was able to read the I haven't seen the final yet, but the draft you sent out was good.
Yes, just came out. We're coordinating and it's looking good.
Good. Well, this evening's topic is how to steal an election. Now, I don't want to adopt political positions here because that's not the purpose, but I found it interesting over the last couple years that someone can say the election was stolen and a significant number of people in the population, a significant percentage, would believe that happened in the absence of proof. And there's a part of me that's a firm believer in Ben Franklin. Two can keep a secret, I'm sorry, three can keep a secret if two are dead. When you get to the sort of stuff that would require hundreds or thousands of people to be involved in an enterprise, it begins to sound a little like minion theory, something I came up with back when I was a teenager and we were very much in love with James Bond films. Mm-hmm. And we would say, how does the bad guy get so many idiots to work for him? How do they have all these people who walk around with machine guns? I mean, do they have health insurance? Do they have a regular payroll? What is it that attaches them to these guys? And that for me was always one of those things that, we talk about willing suspension of disbelief because we want to follow the story. But then when we actually have plots, and writers have imaginations second to none. And as such, they should be invited onto security panels and other things to imagine possibilities. During 9/11, people were saying, who would have thought planes would be used as weapons? Well, they didn't read Tom Clancy or Ian Fleming or see the movie Executive Action or other people who have, or the TV script Doomsday Flight from Rod Serling. Lots of people have done that from a creative writing point of view, and it just went over the head of average people or people in government, which is why you always need writers in circumstances like that. Now, writers don't always get it right. Ian Fleming, when he wrote Goldfinger, which is one of my favorite books, he imagined stealing the gold in Fort Knox. And the filmmaker said he had no idea how hard that would be. So they changed the setup so that he would set off a small nuke and irradiate the gold in Fort Knox, making it useless and his gold worth more. And that made more sense to them. But the filmmakers didn't get it right because you can't stack gold bullion more than 3 high. And if you remember Goldfinger, all those high pallets of 10, 12 rows or piles of gold, the weight from that would crush the wooden pallets. They wouldn't work. So writers don't always get it right, but writers experiment. Yeah. And so we're going to talk about a variety of possibilities for things tonight. You're going to come up with crazy ideas, and this is going to be a challenge. How do you come up with something really wild and make it work? Hold on, I have someone else to admit. Once I get going, I'm not looking at the right side of the screen here to make this happen. So we're going to start with that question. How would you steal an election? And one of our members, fortunately, has a series of books. The first one of which I read recently, which addresses that question in a very credible way. So James McCrone, I'm going to let you, James, talk about yourself and talk about your book, Faithless Elector, which I enjoyed immensely.
Well, thank you.
And I'll just hand it over to you. And if you have questions, we don't have too many people, so if you wait for a lull to do that, or you put in the hand wait or the raising your hand thing. I don't know if you can see mine. Can you see it?
No.
Okay, if you move your mouse around, there's a thing for raising
Oh, okay.
Raising your hand, but I'm not worried about mastering that just yet. If we can, let's see, I'm gonna try to get as many people as I can on screen at once. Okay, all right, so here we go. James, take it away.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for bringing this up. We were talking just at the beginning that writers can imagine things that others either can't or don't. And we are driven by the constraints of the form to, at least try to make it plausible. Obviously you want to have, there is some, willing suspension of disbelief. But in the end, it still has to be sort of believable. So my first book, which came out in March of 2016, is called Faithless Elector. Anybody who doesn't know it, it's it's about stealing the presidency by manipulating the Electoral College. I actually had the idea back in 1996. And I wrote a draft and started sending it out. It went nowhere. But after the 2000 election, when it was so close, I really felt like there was something that there was something there, and I reworked it and rewrote it. And the basic idea that I started with is that at no time has a switched electoral vote changed the outcome of a presidential election, but that in a very close election where they're only separated by 3 or 4 electoral votes, if you could get 3 to switch, then you could overturn the supposed result, and that that is the conspiracy that happens there. So, talking about verisimilitude, what there is a loophole which has partially been filled since the 2016 and the 2020 election, where a number of states have now have laws on the books that their electors have to vote the way the state went, the majority of the state went, but 37 states still don't have that that stipulation. So it remains a possibility in a very close election. In the book, it starts out with a young researcher at the University of Washington in Seattle, where I mostly grew up, he's working on his dissertation, and he happens to be polling electors, both the Democratic and the Republican ones. And he finds a statistically significant number of deaths among the electors. And it becomes even more significant when he realizes that the deaths he's seeing have happened in only about 6 weeks. Now he has to get that information out to somebody who will believe him, because he's had conspiracy theories before, and who can actually stop the plot from going forward. Anyway, the rest of it would be to sort of spoil it, but the idea there was that and I mean the tagline for the book was, everybody thought the election was over, but it isn't. The real election happens in December, not November, when the electors meet at their respective capitals around the country. In terms of how you would actually go about stealing an election, I did a short story for Low Down Dirty Vote, Volume 2, called Numbers Don't Lie, an ironic title. And that I basically use, I live here in Philadelphia, and on election days, I am the majority inspector at the polls. So I work the polls for like 14 hours every election. And I really was I was like, how would you steal an election? How would you go about doing this? And I looked at sort of the protocols that we have here, and they vary from municipality, even municipalities within a state, and certainly state to state. But it would be, at least the way it's done here in Philadelphia, the level of collusion, going back to Gary's original how to keep a secret. If you need 2 or 3 people to collude, you could probably do that. But once you're getting into the hundreds or thousands of people, you're not going to keep that secret. It's gonna it's going to be revealed in some way. And Gary, you were saying at the beginning, I mean, how sort of distressing it is that somebody can claim that an election was stolen with no evidence, and that even after evidence that indeed the election happened, fairly, people still go, no, it's, I don't believe that. At one level, I don't like contributing to that. To that mindset, and yet it's, I think, ripe ground for thrillers and noir thrillers in particular. I think that noir is a particularly apt approach to politics and elections, in that nothing is ever done, nothing's ever over. Politics is like doing the laundry. It's just like, yeah, you did it for now, but a couple of days, a week from now, whatever it is, you're going to need to do it again. Everything is provisional, and that's sort of our noir hero at the end of every at the end of a lot of novels. Like, yeah, I guess that was a good outcome, but was it? Yeah. So I did some notes. When I did look into, so I had to do a lot of research for how how the Electoral College worked, and how you might interfere with that. And Nev, to your point, I often say that while these are political thrillers, they are not political. That is, I don't, for myself as a writer, I don't think it's my job to tell people what to think. It's rather to put this thing out here, to tell this story, and readers will, make up will make up their own minds and come to their own conclusions about, the issues raised. But it's not for me to kind of, clamp down on it. I may have an axe to grind, but I'm not going to do it, in that venue. Shoot, there was one other point I wanted to make, but it's gone completely out of my head. When I came to write the short story, Numbers Don't Lie, which really is about voting machines and stealing an election. I made it be, well, I went online and I researched problems with voting machines. And it turns out there's one called a, I'm going to get it right here real quickly, a Hart intercivic voting machines, not the ones that were that everybody said were or that the GOP said were faulty or had been manipulated. But these Hart intercivics are open to all kinds of mischief. The an electronic voting booth has a number of different aspects to it that can be checked. There is quite a, in the best of them, there's literally a paper ballot. There is also essentially a register tape that not only records the vote and could be cross-referenced with the paper ballot, but it's also keeping a running tally. It is not hooked up to the internet. It can't be manipulated except at the point of voting. Yeah, but that these Hart intercivics were they could easily do multiple overvotes. You could just sit there. It was a scan sheet. You would bubble it in and feed it in, and there were simple ways where you could vote 3, 4, 5 times over and over again. Secondarily, it would have been easy to disable the register tape. And indeed, it was hooked up to the internet the whole time. So you could potentially manipulate at least the electronic results from a distance. I was worried about, or the editor was worried about being sued. And so I changed the name of the machines they were using. But, I was able to, and in fact, it's not exactly, in the end, it's not exactly stealing the election, but adding such a level of uncertainty that people won't trust the result, and it'll have to either be redone, or the courts will have to step in, whatever it might be. The point that I was going to make earlier that I forgot, and back to not having a personal, or not grinding my axe personally in my own work, is I'm on social media and so on. And what was really interesting about when Faithless Elector came out is that I had people writing to me who had read the book. And you can tell kind of, if you look through, what they're doing, where people fall on the spectrum, right or left or whatever. I would get people who are clearly, fairly liberal, and they'd be like, "Oh man, it was great, and I know what you're talking about. We know, right?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm really glad you enjoyed the book," And then I would get people who are clearly very conservative, maybe even to the reactionary side, and they'd be like, "You got it, man. And I'm like, "Oh, I'm really glad you enjoyed the book." Right? It was open to interpretation. In the book, because I felt it was correct for the telling of the story, but it ended up having, I think, a happy result. It ends up, this isn't too much of a spoiler, but it's not actually the parties that are manipulating the electors in this case. Gary and I had a chance to talk just very briefly before this all started, and we were talking about you know, that writers can dream things that, or can, see things that maybe others don't or can't, and that in fact, the science fiction is a perfect kind of example, I think, of all this. That Gary was like, he was trying to, well, you tell it. You were saying something like, you were talking to your
My students, I used to use that as an example. Arthur C. Clarke had this quote, and I can't remember the precise quote. I guess 11 years away from the classroom, I'm not used to brushing up on things that I have to say every day. But said to sufficient levels of ignorance, or to people without certain understanding of education, that higher technology might as well be magic.
right.
And I think that's one of those things that happens with something like the internet. But before the internet, I used to talk about where things go, how they come about, and I speak now proudly as the father of a NASA engineer. But my former wife was also a teacher of English, so we can't figure out where he came from. Uh, but people who wrote, like the real Cyrano de Bergerac, Plato, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, those are the four that pop into my head as having dreamt up journeys to the moon. And let's throw in Georges Méliès' 1902, the first science fiction film, A Trip to the Moon.
Yep.
Where a cannon shell hits the man in the moon in the eye, which is absolutely delightful.
Yeah.
But people imagine going to the moon, and then people who work for NASA, who, like my son, they sit there and they work out the particulars, which is interesting. My son is on the Gateway project.
Oh.
He's on the team designing the space station that'll orbit the moon for the Mars launch. I'm thinking, please let me live long enough to see some of that
Yeah.
my kid is involved in. But what we have is imaginative people come up with stuff, and people who aren't particularly imaginative, but who are focused on the nuts and bolts of mathematics. I said, well, yeah, that could work this way. And then they go off and do it. And I think writers have that special thing where they think of things. And the problem, again, with a number of people believing things, we've come to a point where we're doing we're throwing some modern developments into reverse. Measles,
Right.
the other day was Easter. Well, what resurrected recently was measles. It was just about wiped out.
Right.
But then the anti-vaxxers, or however that particular crew works. And I speak also, I do have a daughter, an adult daughter on the autism spectrum. And we never once thought that was related to vaccines and other things. But, my former sister-in-law is, an avid believer in such things.
Wow.
And I don't know, maybe it was the idea of being, of working for a university where, you get drilled into you in undergraduate and graduate school. If you're going to make a point about something, you need evidence. You need to back up what you say. And that doesn't happen for a lot of people, because somebody says, oh yeah, that must be the way it is, and we've become a very accepting society. Now, my stepmother's in a nursing home, and finally we had to stop her from ordering supplements. She's been seeing nerve supplements that made her think she will walk again. She's heading in on 97. She has not walked in 3 years. She's not walking again. Sad as that is, she's not walking again. But you don't want me to have hope. I said, no. I said, you don't get to see your face when you get these supplements and they come and you take them and you don't get out of the bed. I do.
Mhm.
So I think writers are a special level of people in terms of imagining things that are close to impossible and then trying to figure out ways to make them scalable.
Mhm.
And then we need to be in places where we talk about things like that, where somebody could say, you know, if you want to rob a bank, okay?
Yeah.
And I used to do lectures on murder cases, classic murder cases, public lectures. I'd say things like, "You tell me how you commit the crime, I'll tell you how you get caught." And the audience loved that because everybody thought, "Oh, well, there's I know how to kill somebody," and you know, and they're surprised to know things like the refractory index in glass is almost as individual as fingerprints. So that if you break into somebody's house and do it, and you have a shard of glass in the sleeve of your jacket, they can tell whether it came from the window in your victim's back door or your back door where you claim, no, but I got locked out and had to break in. So writers, I think, are thoughtful enough that they need to be in those rooms where people are saying, hey, we could do blank. Because the writer would say, well, maybe, maybe not, you know?
Yeah. And good editors, you know. There are times when I'm watching something or reading something, and I'll think about my editor on Faithless Elector, and you know, it's funny to me sometimes at writers' panels or book fests or something, people you know will talk and they'll say, "And my editor, my best friend," and I'll think, "Really? How is that?" I mean, it's a good, seems like he's a nice enough guy, but I mean.
Yeah.
Friends would not say the kinds of things to me that he did, I mean,
And he should.
and he should, right? And he made the book better. There was a lot of, you get the pages back and you get the notes and, I would, I would stomp around the, the office, just, and you let go. Yeah, he's probably right. Okay. But there are times there's actually there's a scene in the book between there's no longer a scene in the book between a group of journalists. It was a kind of important plot point, and it was about in manuscript it was probably about 3.5, 4 pages long. And normally you get the one word here underlined or a little note calling out here or whatever. He literally just highlighted the whole scene and wrote no, no, no. He'd been a journalist with the London Times, I guess. And he said this would never happen this way. It just cut this. And I'm like, I need this. There's a plot point here. I worked it out differently, and I think better, frankly, than I had. But that there are, there's so many times, watching crime dramas where you're like, wait, how did he get through that door? I didn't, uh, I'm pretty certain it's hard to Jimmy a lock or, I mean, even just the credit card thing, that doesn't work, that might have worked, in the 70s, but, these days, I just don't know. But that, talking about sort of both the writer's kind of aspirational take towards, politics and or, sort of dark warnings. I kind of looked over at my bookshelf over there, like, what books do I kind of go back to? Like the Foundation trilogy is, I think, extraordinary.
Yes.
Both just great, an extraordinary story, but also, I mean, how hopeful that you would actually think, there's going to be this time of barbarism. It's going to come, but we could actually shorten it. And, it's not the lives of the people in the middle, of this time of barbar are going to be terrible. But instead of it being 1,000 years, I forget the real numbers. Instead of it being 1,000 years long, it'll be 500 or 400. You know, Dune, obviously, you know, the dangers of messianic power, Catch-22. You know, All the King's Men, you know, 1984, of course. More than a couple of Dickens. I mean, Oliver Twist and Hard Times kind of jump out at me. The Octopus by Frank Norris, about, you know, agriculture, greed, corruption, Invisible Man. You know, in just about all of them, except maybe Foundation, you know, the danger is in power being centralized into a small group of people's hands. That's what you know, you know, that's what needs to be guarded against, I guess. And that you know, in my work, even though I'm trying not to call out one side or the other, I am trying to sort of say, you know, yeah, this is bad. You know, you know, if you have a process like the Electoral College that is that open to mischief, you know, maybe it should be, you know, looked at. And that again, what's really dispiriting, I was talking about for my short story, Numbers Don't Lie, that this Heart intercivic machine that I based the machines in the story on are still in use. You know, and the report I was reading that I got a lot of the information from was from 2002, I think. So when I wrote the story in, I think, 2018, there were some updates, but I was even like, oh, I'm sure they fixed it by now. And I'm looking, I'm doing like news reports, you know, searching directly for that. And, you know, there's still, you know, California's like, I don't think we want to use these machines. And, you know, Ohio's like, oh, we think they're great, you know, and like, it's, you know, it's dispiriting. You know, maybe they ought to read more. And, but yeah, I think I talked I talked a little bit about you know, how hard it really would be to steal the election, um, and that that obviously if there weren't a machine, you could, you know, compromise easily. Obviously, the best way to go about it is to disenfranchise as many people as you possibly can.
The old-fashioned way.
The old-fashioned way, right? It's tried and true, you know.
Yes.
It served them well, it served people well for, you know, time immemorial. But again, you know, now you're shrinking, you know, you're shrinking the pool of people, and that you know, for myself, you know, I also get kind of discouraged when you see people talking, you know, there will be oh, you know, talk shows will do this every once in a while where they'll, you know, just the person on the street, you know, where's Costa Rica? Find Costa Rica on the map, and they can't, right? Find Egypt, and they can't. Find, you know, Iran, and they can't. You know, where's what? And then they'll do, you know, where's Washington, D.C.? You know, and they're like, isn't that a state? And you know that, and you know, what kind of grows out of that is like, look how dumb people are. Why are we letting them decide things? And yet, my wife is a political scientist, and you know, in large numbers, people actually do know, you know, what their interest, you know, where their interests lie, what is important. You know, it would be nice if they knew where Egypt was or Costa Rica or wherever, but you know, a good man, you know, that you know, voting in large numbers. I mean, they really can, you know, get it right.
Hey,
you
James.
know,
Winston Churchill had a couple of great quotes. One of them was the best art. Democracy is a terrible form of government. The only problem is every other form is worse. But then he
Right.
also said The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the man in the street.
Right. But if it were, 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, you get a different answer because you're talking not necessarily at high level, but I mean about sort of what do we call kitchen table kinds of issues that I hope are meaningful to all of us. Did you raise
Well,
your
that's
hand?
how the jury system works too. Out of
Right.
the dozen people, you hope 2 or 3 will have something in their heads.
Yeah, well, and in
That's
fact, I mean,
interesting.
they say, I've actually, I think every time I've been called for jury duty 4 times over the last 7, 8 years, and pretty much when we get to, oh, you're a writer, goodbye. I just earlier in the month, I was sitting, I'm sitting in the thing, and the judge is asking me questions. It says here, you're a writer, and I said, yes. He goes, what do you write? I said, thrillers, political thrillers, and I can see him kind of going, uh-huh. And then it says here, your wife's a professor of what? I said, political science. At this point, I can tell I'm out, right? And I just go, her subfield is constitutional law. So they're like, thank you very much, Mr. McCrone, goodbye. But Al, to your point, what I have heard, and I had to tell that little story to say it is only what I've heard, is that people try not to do jury duty. They try to get out of it in any, in all kinds of ways. And yet once they're impaneled, they have a job to do.
They take it seriously, yes.
And they take it seriously, and is it perfect? Hardly, but they will do what's required and do their duty, if you will, which is laudable and wonderful. But
James,
yeah,
can I make a comment on that?
of course.
I did jury duty about, I don't know, I guess it's a year and a half ago. And during that time, it was Zoom only jury duty, which
Oh,
so cool because there was a big screen that was put into the courtroom and the camera faced the judges and the 2 lawyers. But the lawyers, instead of facing the judges, the attorneys had to sit on the other side of the table. So everybody faced like the camera, right? Oh, it was really cool. It felt like you were in a TV drama. So it was interesting because as they were addressing the group, and there was a moderator that you had to be on camera, and if you had to go to the bathroom, you had to raise your hand and do all these different things. It was a great experience. But
Yeah.
they actually, before they even got to me and asked me the questions, they actually had to take a 15-minute time period to address the whole crowd and to tell them, this is not Hallmark. This is not amateur detective time. You're not allowed to contact any people in the jury. You're not allowed to try investigate on your own. Don't start Googling stuff because I guess online, because the material's out there while they're on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was really interesting the way they started doing that. And the minute they heard you were an author or a journalist or something like they just hit a button. They don't even explain. They hit a button and you're deleted and gone and you can't even get back in.
Yeah.
So it was really very interesting process. I loved it, honestly. So I just thought I'd let you know.
Yeah,
that.
no, thank you. That's great. Yeah, I've talked a lot, I'm sorry. But
That's okay.
were there any questions or
Well, I wanted to make a comment
Yeah.
on the whole jury thing. Linda, I'm glad you told that story. I have had 3 jury experiences, 2 with real juries, and they were both lawsuits. I'm thinking, I want a good criminal. No, no good criminal. My best friend had a murder trial. My mother had a murder trial. Yeah, okay, no, nothing like that. But the third experience with the jury was an experiment between our psych department and our law school. And it was a mock jury, and they set up everything. And that proved to be the most interesting because it reveals the thing that I think jury work does, and something that we as writers are concerned about. because stories are always about people being people. And in this particular jury, we got to deliberations, and people started saying things like, I know he's guilty of something. I can tell by the way he looks.
Oh, God.
And I'm thinking, the mock setup was that he was supposed to have approached a child, and approaching a child was a crime in this setup. And I listened to other people talking about the circumstance, and I thought, man, I hope I never get on trial. Never, because people think in strange ways, and I think it's our job as writers to reflect that.
Yeah.
But people do think in strange ways. They make quantum leaps in illogic. For example, I have a brother who down in Maryland who doesn't believe in vaccines, didn't believe in surgical masks and all those things. And up here we had, COVID was a terrible time. That best friend who was on a murder trial, he lost his wife to the COVID epidemic. And it was, those things were just horrible. But we got our vaccines, we did whatever, and my better half's 94-year-old mother lives upstairs and has beginning dementia. We got through all this, and then once when Tammy was away and I'm just home with mom, I was feeling, what's wrong with me? And I took a COVID test. I had COVID. I gave her the COVID test. She had COVID. And we got through it without a problem, because at that point, I ordered food. I let people know not to come to the house. There were just the two of us. And Tammy wasn't going to be back until actually our time would be done. And so we went through all that. And I called my brother, and he said, all those vaccines didn't do a thing for you. I said, they kept me from dying. The point of those was not to, as much as possible to stop things. But if you got it so you weren't that sick. And I said, nah, they didn't do anything for you. They said, I told you should be taking more vitamin E. And he just went through. And I said, where'd you go to medical school with your GED? Because you don't. I stopped short of that. I'm saying,
Sure.
there are people who know what to look for, who know something about this. And I have a number of best friends. We grew up together. We're all retired, but English professor, me, math professor, Scott, medical doctor, Dennis, and electrician, Dwayne. And Dwayne's the one who lost his wife. But Dennis, his daughter is also a doctor. And for a gift, he gave her a cup that said, your Google search does not equal my MD. So she could keep it on her desk. Because people just make amazing leaps in faulty logic. And that's great stuff to write about.
Yeah.
People are certain, oh yes, well, it must be that this is the case. Thinking, well, wait a minute, So,
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Gary. It's not really about logic at all. A lot of this stuff is about emotion. People have a certain emotion or a feeling, and that trumps everything. As an example, I'm a scientist, right? I worked for many, many years with lots of scientists. We were engineers and chemists, and we ran chemical plants that depended on measurements of temperature and pressure and flow. And if you get that wrong, the thing blows up, right? And I would have friends, we'd sit at the table and they say, oh, the temperature of the globe isn't rising. And I say, what is it about the thermometers that trained people are deploying all around the globe that says the temperature is higher? But it just, to them, again, it seems to me it was just an emotional thing, because again, it's like, okay, I can understand how the man in the street who maybe, isn't scientifically trained might wonder. But if you make your living depending on temperature measurements, anyway.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's one of those things where the average man in the street may wonder something. The average person in the street may wonder something. I wonder how this connects. But if you have a bird-brained idea and you make that connection and you start convincing yourself that this is the way it works, and I'm not gonna, I'm not trying to get political here, but Vivek Ramaswamy, when he was running for president, in one of those debates, he said, and I think climate change is a hoax. And I thought, really? You think climate change is a hoax in the hottest year on record?
Yeah.
Where in Arizona, cacti, which evolved to survive in heat, were dying from the heat. You think that this is all some sort of trick?
Yeah.
So
Well, that was the other thing. We were talking about it, and this was some years ago, but I said, look, I showed them on my phone. Here's pictures of the Arctic polar ice cap 10 years ago, and here's a picture of it today. And they're like, no, that's not true. I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, who are you going to believe? The guy on television or your lying eyes, right?
Well, and that so it's been good, this discussion too about what people will believe and how they the obviously you need verisimilitude, but in the it's also true that you're writing about people and people will do any darn thing. I've been the book I'm trying to finish right now is called Witness Tree, and I've set it in rural Oregon, and I'm actually trying to deal with a guy who's come out of prison, and his only two friends who will even talk with him and help him out are really not just conservative, but maybe toward reactionary, and how and he's how are they like this? Why are they like this? Should I be part of, how do I, stay friends with them? Things like this. I mean, that's not that's an aspect to the overall story, but that's been really, really hard to do, and to keep, that, early on, I said, you don't have an axe to grind, right? I mean, that you want to treat your characters fairly. They may be, this may be, the bad guy, but you need to at least understand, even if you don't agree, you have to understand why this person is acting the way they are, or at least have a vague sort of notion. And I'm still not done with the book. It's been like we're coming on to 2 years now. It's just I went back through my cut file and I've actually ripped up about 40 pages. That and I'm now trying anyway. You don't need to hear my tale of woe, but to sort of echoing everybody else's point, trying to do right by the story, do right by the characters. In the end, I hope it'll make it a better book, but at the minute, it's making me pull my hair out.
that yeah,
Part of the job, right?
part of the
Yeah.
process.
Well, yeah.
So one quick thing, I've been putting stuff in the posting stuff in the chat here. A great movie on an election machine glitch causing somebody to become elected, and Robin Williams, right? What's not to love? Man of the Year. And then, of course, what heartens us is that the glitch causes a good man to be elected. Maybe not a politician, but somebody that does right. But it can be far scarier than that, right? Right now, the second link I just put in, which is kind of long-winded, is about a test done by an organization. So I'm going to say test 5 times. This did not go through, okay? But this company basically was deliberately putting out false ads to see whether YouTube would catch them. And it didn't catch any one of them. So India is a huge democracy. This is an organization that was testing. It's called Global Witness and Access Now. That's the organization. And all of their false ads went through. When you look at the bottom of that link, those are exactly the kind of disenfranchisement stories that
Yeah.
can very easily cause, very persuasive, cause people to either change the way they vote or to not vote. And
Yeah.
I would read one of those and go, okay, really? It's just enough to cause confusion that might go, oh, maybe I should have done an advanced ballot. It's enough to cause confusion that stop people voting. So this is a scary world we're living.
No, indeed.
I
Yeah.
think the information that we're getting, we are awash in information, much more than in the past. I'm a child of the 50s, you know. I grew up and I read my comic books and I read my children's books and I did my homework and I watched television and I had a cowboy hat and a gun and all those other things that little boys had in the 50s. And it was a much simpler world.
No.
And I find now there is so much information that is coming all the time. And I mean, one of the things I thought when I retired, I'm not going to get the email I got when I was working, because my university email account got, well, I still use it, gets on average 200 emails a day. And later on, well, did you get my emails? My God, there's so much, I can't keep up with it. And it looks like every time I unsubscribe from something, I get signed up for 3 more services or 3 more lists somewhere along the way. And some just never unsubscribe because that tells them that you have a working email. Well, some of them have got to stop because I just can't keep spending this much time. You know, email.
I don't think unsubscribing works. I think you just have to click junk so that it gets. And even that, I can't keep up. I have a Comcast sign on or whatever, and I have like 4 different email accounts. And the one that pretty much everybody has, I can hardly, it gets buried. But I have one just for writing, so that and it only gets 5 emails a week sometimes. But that's what I would recommend.
Okay.
Segregate.
Creating rules also so that certain subscriptions go automatically into the junk folder or into a folder that you might want. But I do agree we are awash with information, and yet people are very persuadable. So there's positive and negative here, right? We're writers, we want to persuade. But I think the responsibility aspect is to tell the stories and let people then come to conclusions, personify the issues. So, I do go on Twitter, and that's where I do my political rants, but we're allowed to have an opinion, but that doesn't,
Sure.
thrust it on anybody else. It's an opinion. The key is in our books, I think, is to the service we can do really to our readers is to make it personal, is to make it emotional, and to allow people to be empathetic. And right now I'm hearing such a lot of anti-immigrant stuff. And it shocks me because, especially legal immigrants. So I'm an immigrant. I came legally. It took us 7 years to get our green card. And I know I have friends that are in the queue and are expecting to be in the queue for 17 years. So they are furious about people walking in, right? But the empathy part of it shocks me that people I think are good, decent people have such incredibly low empathy for what people are suffering. We've never had guns pointed at us. I've never been afraid that my family will be taken away and shot. I come from India. People in South America have that situation, and yet my own dear friends who I respect and admire their intelligence have incredibly low empathy. And this is where storytelling can make the difference, is to tell stories about people. Ultimately, it's about people.
One thing that shocked me is I worked with a lot of Italian Americans, and so they were a generation or 2 removed from their family coming over, not speaking English, living in neighborhoods and getting along. And they would go and I'd hear them ranting about how I went to this, and the guy was trying to order. And I said, "Speak English, damn it! You're in America." And I'm like, "Really? Like 30 or 50 years removed?" It's like, wow.
No, that happened to a friend of mine. My better half is Latina, and one of her close friends, they were on a couple of boards together. He was painting a house one summer with his nephew who came from Puerto Rico. And so they stopped and they're taking a break. And he is talking to his nephew in Spanish. As a woman goes by, an older woman, we're in America, speak English.
Yeah.
And she was speaking to a decorated veteran of the Vietnam War. It's like, wait a minute, you can't assume because of that. I mean, I watched it. My mother-in-law, Spanish is her first language, and she's getting to a point where she's losing English. But in the past, if I would go out someplace with her and she'd start talking with her accent, people would start to look, and I'd look back and glare. And then I would say something in my professorial voice, which pretty much shut them up. But but you're right. Empathy is the point of literature. You read literature, you study story, because they teach us how to feel. They teach us what it means to be human. And we lose that at great risk to civilization itself. So I wanted to toss out, give you a moment to come up with any wild idea that you thought might work in a story. Because again, I think writers need to be on security advisory panels, because they'll say, well, what about blank? So, well, you can't do that. Well, no, what if you, okay, 4th grade Gary. Could there be people on, I forget whether we were talking about Jupiter or Uranus? And the teacher says, no. I think it was Uranus. He said, the atmosphere is methane. I'm in 4th grade. I said, but what if there are people who breathe methane? Shut up, Gary. but again,
That's not helpful, Gary.
Yeah, it's like, can we please get people who are imaginative to sit on panels and say, hey, we should think about this. We should think about that, without having a political construct. Again, you talk about immigrants now from South America. One of my big beefs with all the fretting over the border is what happens in some of those countries in Mexico, Central America, and South America, where people are fleeing violence.
Yeah.
They're fleeing drug cartels who sell what? Drugs to us. They're fleeing people who commit mass horrible violence with weapons that we make. Somewhere in there, something, I'm not sure what the responsibility is, but recognizing that fact should make a difference somewhere in how we address things. So,
yeah.
Anybody?
Wild ideas you wanted. Okay, foreign government decides to rig our election. The rig is a legitimate word. Steal the election by causing power outages, so that people, either don't get information, can't get what they want to do. Power outages being a weak spot in the infrastructure. I think there might be easier ways to do it than that, even, because computers are all connected. So one nasty virus that shuts down a bunch of, systems would be easier probably than power outages too. But hey, you wanted ideas.
No, and that works. Now, a quick story, A Tale of Two Blackouts. 1965, Eastern Seaboard had a blackout. That began at the Adam Beck plant in Niagara Falls, Ontario, Canada, which is, Niagara Falls is like 12, 14 miles from Buffalo, and you get to the Rainbow Bridge, you cross, and just on the other side of the Rainbow Bridge is the Adam Beck plant, which was part of that blackout. There's the foreign country. The mistake at the Adam Beck plant caused the blackout. And at the time, I was walking home from the store in the evening. My grandmother had sent me to get something, and suddenly all the lights went out. Street lights, everything. House lights, and only car lights. And I literally felt my way home. A few years later, well, many years later, I'm at Darien Lake, our amusement park there. I'm there with my family. And this was after 9/11. And there was another blackout on the Eastern Seaboard. In fact, right after we got off the Man of Steel roller coaster, the next crew riding up got stuck. The roller coaster is like this on the, the clack, clack, clack to the top and down. Nope, it got stuck. and we didn't know what was happening. And at the time, I was doing opinion pieces for my university's NPR station, and nobody knew what happened. And I called the station, and the station manager was there, and he said, "What's going on?" I said, "I don't know. It's over." But he put me on the air to report live from the amusement park for what was going on. Totally different sensation then, because 1965, when that blackout happened, the lights went out. What happened? Nobody knew. This was, what was it, 2002 or something? I think that happened. Suddenly, it's a terrorist attack. Everybody's gearing up for something completely different. So yeah, we could certainly have a wild idea where that worked. Anybody else? Let's see. Oh, okay. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, for logging in. It is 7:04. We usually end around 7 for this. I want to toss out something for next month's CrimeCraft that I'd like you to think about. Now, I know, raise your hand if you started getting interested in writing because you read short stories. If that's something that got you interested in writing. Okay, because I'm thinking we should remember some of those stories. I want to talk about crime short stories that are memorable next month. And I will point to one that was in the Alfred Hitchcock collection, Stories for Late at Night, which my mother passed to me as she passed books to me when she read them. And it was called A Cry from the Penthouse by Henry Slessor. One of the best short stories I've ever read. I still have not forgotten it. So next month, I'd kind of like to talk about, because I made a note over here on my, short stories. I'd kind of like to talk about classic crime short stories, because they're things that, I don't know, they caught me when I was young, and they made me a writer and an English professor, I think. So, okay.
Good idea. Excellent. Look
I
forward
like
to
it.
it.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
I want to thank Jim. That was great. Fascinated
yes.
to hear how much research goes into this.
Thank you.
You know, it is a bit of a cautionary tale, and this is an election year, but hey,
Yeah.
it's what we got.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you have a pleasant rest of the evening.
You too.
And
you.
I'll see you next month.
Wonderful.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Good night all.
Great seeing you. Bye-bye.